Okay, so now that we have our electronics working, and we have tested the motor to make sure that it is moving when we use SMARTA, we're going to start assembling the conveyor belt on the wooden board, as you can see here. So all I've really done, I've pre-assembled a couple things before this part of the video, but you can see here this whole part, the electronics and the wires and whatnot, is what we were just doing in the previous segment. The difference is I have now built this gearbox that comes from the Tamiya track vehicle kit. One important thing as you're building this, make sure you build the normal speed version. You'll see in the instructions that you can either build the fast version or the normal speed version. We want the normal speed because it'll give us more control over how fast the food comes out of the device. You can tell you're using the normal speed version if you have all 4 gears in here. You can see there's 4 big gears. If you ended up with a 3-gear version, you accidentally built the fast one. So once you build the gearbox, you're going to put the hexagonal axle on it and put these spoked wheels on this side because that's what's going to drive the conveyor belt. And then your motor that you previously had soldered the wires on just snaps into there like this. Right? So all we've really done is taken what we did last time and snapped it into this constructed gearbox. Here's the way that the conveyor belt board gets laid out. So the Arduino with its shield goes in the middle like this. The gearbox goes on this end over here to the right. I find it's best to just run the power cable underneath this axle here, and then once we assemble everything, you'll see that kind of just holds it in place, and it just avoids things getting all over and potentially getting caught in the gears. On the other end, we have our serial to USB connection. I'm also going to put that underneath the other axle on the other side, just to, again, to kind of hold everything where it is. It'll probably be a good idea to tape this down later, but at least if it's under the axle, we know it's not going to get caught on anything. It's not going to get stuck in a wheel or anything. Okay, so this is the basic layout that we're going to use. In order to attach things, we're going to drill some holes and put some screws in. And you may have seen this piece from the laser cutting plans. This is it's like a piece of guide plastic that is going to sit here on the board like so. And so I'm just going to show you this here. So this is going to be the front of SMARTA. This is another one of the acrylic pieces. This is the hole cut out for the tablet, and this is the food chute. You're going to want to do what I did here. You're going to want to kind of temporarily loosely attach all the brackets, so these big brackets, and that's going to help us figure out where to drill our holes. And you also want to kind of temporarily attach the small brackets, really the 3/4 inch 2-hole brackets, to this guide plastic. Because we're just going to lay everything out and put it on the shelf, and then we're going to use a pencil to mark all of the holes. So, one last thing to think about before we do that is I have pre-assembled this off camera. This is the actual conveyor belt that will hold the food. Well, it will hold the cups that hold the food. When you put this together, it's again part of that Tamiya kit. The track will come in a sheet of pieces. I've already ripped almost all of them off here. You want to use all of the pieces other than one small piece. So everything other than one small piece, and that'll give you just the right length for SMARTA's conveyor belt, like so. And we're only going to put it on just this one side because this is the side that's going to dispense the food. Alright, so I'm just going to set that aside for now because until we get things attached, it doesn't really matter that much. Alright, so let's start by marking out where we're going to put the holes for, why don't we get a pencil, and we'll do the gearbox first. That one's obviously super important. A kind of a rule of thumb is you want these orange gears to kind of line up with the end of the board. So make sure everything's centered as best you can, and get the end of the wheel lined up with the board. And I'm just going to mark inside the hole where you need to drill for a screw. Just mark inside those little holes, and those are all set. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. In this case, we probably will want to put this conveyor on just to make sure we're putting it far enough away that it's under tension, because you want it to be rigid. So I'm just going to put it in here like so, and I just want to get an idea of how far away these rear wheels need to be. Okay, so it's again pretty much lined up with the end of the board. So, okay, we'll just use that rule of thumb for both sets of wheels. Notice the wheels in the back that I got from the kit, I'm just using the smooth wheels. Since they're not connected to the motor, they don't need to have the teeth. There's no benefit to having the teeth, they're just holding the conveyor belt kind of rigid. So we'll put these just like we did with the motor, so that the edge of the wheel is flush with the end of the board, okay? So kind of just exactly like what I have it there, you can see that the edge of the wheel is flush with the end of the board. I want to get everything straight. Okay, say like so. All right. And we don't want to put this too close to the edge of the board because we don't want the board to crack. So just line it up like that and then put marks in the hole. Whoop, knock something over. Put marks in the holes and that's where we're going to drill. Okay. It's kind of like you're using these parts as a template to help you drill the proper holes later. Okay. So I'm just going to pick this up to show you. So see, now I've marked where I'm going to drill all my holes, and it's the same thing on the gearbox on the other side. So now that we have those all figured out, let's do the same thing for this guide. The purpose of this guide actually is that, let me just kind of stick it in here to show you roughly how it goes. So it roughly goes like this. Electronics go in the middle, gearbox goes down here. The purpose of this guide is to hold the conveyor belt, because remember it's going to be on this side over here, to hold the cups of food flush against the front of the machine. It'll make more sense once we install it into the machine later, but if we didn't have this guide belt, this belt is pretty floppy, right? There's nothing really, holding up the middle of it. So once you put food in it, it's going to want to kind of tip. And so this guide here is going to hold any cups of food that you have against the front of the machine and keep them from tipping over before they get dispensed. So we need to also mark where this one's going to go. There's one quirk about this board that's to be aware of. It's not symmetrical. It's almost symmetrical, but you see there's two cutouts here in the bottom, two shallow ones. That's where it's actually going to go on top of these brackets. And then there's the two bigger cutouts on either end, which are for the wheels of the conveyor belt. But it's not symmetrical, to be honest with you, because the first SMARTA that we built we thought would actually be the last. And so I built this after we realized that the conveyor was a little bit floppy as kind of a workaround to that problem. And we had just kind of haphazardly placed things. So these cutouts are based on where we had built the first SMARTA, so that's why it's not perfectly symmetrical. If you're crafty and you want to fix this up in the laser cutting plans and make it symmetrical, go for it. But I'm just going to stick with this because it's worked for us so far, and I don't want to mess anything up. So I want it to be flush against the edge, and this is exactly the same length as the board. So make sure the ends match up with where the board ends, and keep your motor right on the dots you put because you don't want to misalign any of these things. Okay, so now I have the motor right where the motor is supposed to be, and I can see that the board is lined up perfectly, so I'm just going to put, again, a little dot inside where I need to put holes for these small brackets. And the electronics, you have a little bit of wiggle room, so if it's running into that bracket, just move it down a little bit. You have basically the length of these wires to play with. I can see here I'm going to be pushing it to its maximum probably to get everything to fit. Worst case scenario, you can replace these motor wires with a slightly longer one. Just any small wire will do. Make sure it's flush on the edge, and then once everything's good, go ahead and put your dots. It's going to take a little bit, but you want to make sure you get these holes lined up because you need these screws to go in the right place. It's kind of a delicate balancing act here. One last thing that we need to accommodate, which is this shelf. So here's how the shelf gets attached, because we need to drill holes for this. Just take the electronics off. It goes like so. So the bracket actually goes on the top of the board like this. So we need to drill the holes through the top for this, and these holes are going to go all the way through. Okay, so I realized that in order to put this on the front panel of SMARTA and figure out where the bracket holes need to go, what I really need to do is screw on the two sets of wheels first, That way they stay put, and we can attach the conveyor belt and it will stay on here, because then what that's going to let us do is put it onto the front panel without the conveyor belt falling off, and that will let us figure out where to drill the hole for these, because right now without the belt on there it's just really hard to align things properly. So when we come back you'll see that those wheels are attached and how we're going to figure out where to drill a hole for these brackets. Okay, so this is what the board looks like with the holes drilled that we just talked about. I used a 3/32 inch drill bit for all the holes because that seemed like a close fit to the screws that we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm about to screw all the hardware we talked about in so we can figure out where the bracket's going to go. But just to give you a preview of what hardware we're going to use, the screws for the gearbox and the rear wheels are going to be these little screws that come with the Tamiya set. So these are not any of the screws you may have bought separately. These are the ones that come in the kit, just the little screws. The ones that go into, let me just put this back. The ones that are going to hold the small little angle brackets are just any small wood screw. I bought these number 6 1/2 inch. But you know, really any small wood screw that you have available would be fine for those. So I'm going to go ahead and screw that back in and then we'll continue. Okay, so as you can see I have roughly attached things. So I attached the rear axle, I attached the motor to the front, and I just partially put these little braces in. One thing I noticed as I was doing this, and then I put the conveyor belt on. So as you can see, if you put these wheels right on the edge like this, it makes the conveyor belt, you know, fairly rigid, but it's still kind of floppy in the middle, which is why we have the guard here. But one thing I noticed is that when I first put it on, the belt was almost touching the guard, and that reminded me one of the things you need to do is this. The axle on the motor actually needs to be a little bit longer on this side, as you can kind of see here. I had it symmetric and the wheel was too close. So when you're putting the motor together, leave a little extra space on this side, the side that's going to have the conveyor belt. Here's a second motor that I've been working on over here for a second SMARTA I'm building. You can see on this one I've moved it so there's a little bit more on this side near the little worm screw that holds the gears together. Just a little bit longer on this side, and that'll leave enough room for the conveyor belt. Okay, so we just drilled the 2 holes for the large brackets. You may notice that the large brackets actually have 2 holes, but just because of the way we want to align things, we're only drilling a single hole, and you'll see once it gets attached. It's going to be these, this is what's going to go into the large bracket, the 10/24 1.5 inch machine screws. And so these holes here are actually, let me make sure I get this right, for drilling it's 3/16 inch drill bit, and it's actually going to come up through the bottom, through the top, and you're going to put a bolt here. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the construction of the conveyor belt, and then we'll show you how it attaches, and then that part is done. This is what the completed conveyor belt assembly looks like. So I have screwed on obviously the 2 sets of wheels, but I've also taken off the protective covering on the acrylic for this part of the conveyor belt. You can see where the Arduino goes and how I put the wires underneath the wheel axles on both sides. You don't have to do that, but like I said, it will avoid it getting tangled. And if I rotate it around, you can see how the conveyor is ready to go. We're going to put our cups here, and this is what's going to hold it against the front of the apparatus. And we have our large holes drilled and ready to go for our bolts. They're going to come up through the bracket like this, and we're going to bolt them on. You'll see that towards the end of the video once we are building the enclosure and adding this conveyor belt to it. But now that you have this done, this is probably one of the hardest parts to put together. So if you got this far, you're almost there.